We'll get started, and whomever joins can join in progress. Just want to thank everybody for joining the call. We have a couple panelists here I'll introduce in a couple moments, but covering the subject matter is really just trying to get to the core of how to maximize cash flow and manage landlord expenses. And you have Rent Panda on the call, both Hart and myself. You have Alex and Kat from Perch, and then you have Hamza from minhascpa. So just in terms of intros around the board, why we're here, credibility to talk about the subject matter, I'm going to hand it off to Alex just to talk a few words about Perch. Just to let you know a little bit about Perch before we go ahead. Perch enables Canadians to make data-driven decisions about their mortgages and real estate to build wealth. So Alex, if you want to add to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So I'm CEO of Perch. We're also principal broker. So I've been in the mortgage space for about 5 years now, in the real estate space for 9 years. And really, that's really what we're helping people with is how do you get first-time home buyers into the market, and then how do you help existing homeowners, particularly investors, manage through the good times, the bad times, and then keep building wealth over the long run.
Great. Thanks, Alex. And then I'll introduce Hamza from minhascpa. So he's a chartered accountant with over 10 years experience helping individuals and private businesses in an array of industries with a focus on real estate. His goal is to help clients achieve their goals in the most tax efficient manner. Hamza?
Thanks, Rob. Hello, everyone. As Rob mentioned, we are a boutique firm, and I am the practitioner founder of minhascpa. We've been established here in the GTA for almost 10 years now, and our focus is to help clients grow their business and assist them with their tax needs. We focus on corporate clients, individuals, anybody who is looking for any kind of tax assistance, accounting assistance, business plans from a knowledgeable professional.
Great. Thanks, Hamza. And intro about Hart, just to let you know about Rent Panda, we're the rental experts providing tools and services landlord need to find the best tenants. And if you're not already familiar with Hart, you can do a bit of an intro here.
Thanks, Rob. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Hart. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Rent Panda. Many of you original landlords that I can see on the call probably know Richard, my brother and co-founder. But to elaborate on what Rob said, we provide tools and services for the small to medium scale landlord. We're small landlords ourselves, and everything we do because we want to support the journey of small and medium scale landlords here in Ontario and hopefully very soon across Canada. So we provide digital tools, leasing services, property management in Thunder Bay, and lots of education like nights like tonight, and bringing experts to the table to hopefully give you a more rounded education on your journey as a landlord and keep you up to date on anything and everything happening within the industry. So lots to talk about tonight, and enough about us. Rob, over to you.
Just to introduce myself, I work hand in hand with Hart at Rent Panda, more so in the Southern Ontario around Hamilton area. So Hamilton stretching to, St. Catharines, Niagara, all the way west from Brantford to London. So a bigger area there, while Hart covers, the North York, Toronto, Thunder Bay situation. So I'll be the moderator tonight. Just in terms of participation, we'd love for everyone to participate. We'll try to get to every comment that we can. We'll stop after every section. If you do want to ask a question, it's easier to communicate that by popping yourself off mute. Just if you don't mind raising your hand, one of us here on the panel will try to call you out and then weigh in after the subject matter. If we can't get to your question or it requires a longer explanation, we'll take that away as a group and we'll provide a follow-up email to all the participants and answer that question in detail. If it requires even further explanation, I'll leave everybody's contact information at the end of this call, and you can contact them direct for any further clarification or any questions you may have. So as you all know, we're here to discuss strategies and tactics for Ontario landlords and the collective landlords to optimize your cash flow. So first, we're just going to kick it off to Alex at Perch to talk about how to optimize your mortgage, and then we'll move on subjects from there.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it topical to a lot of the cash flow issues that a lot of landlords face today. So one of the big ones being all the properties that were purchased in the last year or two on variable rate mortgages when rates were super low. So whether it's people that broke their trigger rate, the adjustable rate mortgages that just increased. So some of the things we're seeing where cash flow is becoming harder to manage, but we're able to squeeze out a bit more. The first one is readvanceable HELOCs. So offered by a lot of the major banks and even some of the monolines, locking in your total credit limit and basically converting your mortgage payments into interest-only payments through a readvanceable HELOC is something that we've seen be the emergency fund that gets, like, the people broke the glass in case of emergency over the last year on a lot of them. So having those in place has really been phenomenal to help kind of ride it out. The second element there on trigger rates, we've seen some lenders, and it depends on a case-by-case basis, but the ones that did have a variable rate mortgage where the triggers broke, some are actually allowing for negative amortizations. And today they published an article that they're even exploring 40-year amortizations. So that's going to be something that you definitely can reach out about and explore further that could help you further manage cash flow. The last element is when you have a mortgage that's coming up for maturity, because most of the time people locked in rates at much lower rates that they would be able to get today. So there's no incentive to break just to extend your amortization, because then you typically actually don't end up lowering your mortgage at all. Breaking 2% to lock in 6 isn't really going to help you, even if you get the AM back up to 30. So things that are worth considering when there's still excess equity in the property is second mortgages. Which historically, are something that people try to avoid as a last resort. But we're seeing a lot more use cases for second mortgages to keep that really low first mortgage that you have for the rest of your term, and then just getting a term match second mortgage to help ride it through. Because at the end of the day, extending your amortization lowers your payment. But if you're able to get a second mortgage, it's basically like a lump sum of money that you can just decline or decrease over the life of the mortgage as well. So we've been seeing a couple of those use cases for sure over the last 6 to 12 months, particularly.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Just before we go off, is there any questions? I'm just checking chat. I don't see anything. Okay, great. Just moving on, in terms of, Hamza, if we transition to, how does an investor really optimize their, look at tax implications to optimize their cash flow? If you can kind of speak to that a little bit in terms of complementing what Alex said, that'd be great.
Most definitely. So there are several ways to manage cash flows, and I'll touch on them on a very high level because each case is obviously unique to the individual and their circumstances. But you have to think about whether you want to take depreciation on the property right now or not, save that tax, right? There are implications down the road for taking depreciation right now. Also, in terms of spending on repairs and maintenance, and getting that tax break. So you want to try to time that in a way that it maximizes your cash flow. So generally, if you can, try to spend that money at the end of the year. Okay, so that when we go to file your taxes the following year for the previous year, you are getting that tax break just a little bit sooner rather than having to wait, a full 12 months in an extreme case, whether if you spend the money in January. Also, if there's family members who are involved in the rental operations, perhaps think about income splitting, right? And that can also help sometimes alleviate that tax burden. And those are the main things. And then we get into other areas where if you perhaps need to let go of a property, if it was structured correctly from the get-go, perhaps it's going to save you tax when you do let it go, right? Whether it's having multiple ownerships on there, yourself, your spouse, your siblings, your children, your parents. Again, depending on how you structure it initially, and whether it makes sense for you, when the time comes to sell off, at least that gain is split off, right? It's not just one person bearing the brunt of it. So that takes early tax planning and foresight for sure. And then the last one would be corporations. Whether you want to, again, this is thinking well ahead of time for situations that we're currently in, right? Having a portfolio perhaps in different companies. right? Sometimes that also helps because, again, with income splitting or taking on income or not, if it doesn't make sense at the time. So again, that's more of a pre-planning item. And all those things, again, combined, that you're constantly reviewing with your clients helps us, manage cash flows and save money where we can.
Great, that's great insight, Hamza. I'll stop there. Is there any questions specifically for Hamza on that subject, or just checking chat? Looks like not. Okay, so Hart, if you can just shift for a moment and talk about the perspective or the position, let's say, as it relates to cash flow overall for landlords.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll go kind of backwards from what Hamza said, and just mention that, when you are looking to potentially offload a property, obviously there are implications that you want to talk to your mortgage broker about and your accountant about and everyone. But thinking about offloading properties should be something that more landlords are taking into account, and not only at that red line, but when they're initially purchasing a property. So it's more and more a conversation now of evaluating your cash flow of property, evaluating deals, but understanding your red line so that you can preemptively understand what storm you can weather. And if you're in a variable rate or with the impending announcements coming, you can really foresee what's going to happen with your property, and you're not surprised when that property does hit red line. So that's kind of one thing is engage in a conversation about what your red line is. When you would need to offload that property, when it no longer makes sense. And a lot of landlords don't want to think about that because they just want to build portfolio. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to. So have the conversation with your experts. The other thing to talk about is obviously rent. And so when we talk about cash flow, rent is going to make up the majority of that equation. But the majority of the conversation happening in the media is about how rents are going up and going up and going up, and have been increasing for the last 2.5 years exponentially. And the reality is rents are starting to stabilize, and in a lot of markets they're even coming down. And so we just released our second rent report where it shows 6 of the provinces actually show cumulative rent decreases for November, and that's the second month that's happening. So October and November we had rent decreases. Some markets are still strong. Obviously, the Toronto market, things are still growing. But as we look at some of the secondary markets, things like, Kingston, Peterborough, which was very hot, Barrie, St. Catharines, Thunder Bay, rents are starting to stabilize. And I think that shows the indication of what the market is leaning towards. And so you really need to be scrutinizing the properties that you're buying, the properties that you're looking at in terms of deals, and your current properties, because you can no longer account for that exponential rent growth month over month. And you can't be looking to your tenants to just bear that burden, especially if you're in a rent controlled property. So we'll talk about rents a little bit more so, but definitely think about your rents. And then a lot of people were turned into unintentional landlords, I would say, over the last few months. So with the market shifting, a lot of people are first-time landlords because they may be flipping or wholesaling, and they're stuck with deals. And so they've turned to the rental market as an opportunity to hold on to those properties, either in the long term or in the short term. And so really understanding what an analysis of a deal looks like from a landlord perspective as opposed to a flipper or a wholesaler is key. And if it is your first time as a landlord, seek out the experience of a coach, companies that can help you out, the experts in the field that can help you evaluate how to truly pull positive cash flow from that property, or at least break even or weather the storm from a negative cash flow perspective. So lots of things to think about, but I would say the top 3 are the unintended landlord should look to education, evaluate the red line of your property, and then consider rent stabilizing and even going down in the next couple months.
And actually, I guess, Rob, if I may just tag on to one of the points Hart had with the first-time landlords. It's been interesting because you're seeing a record number or a huge number of delistings. And a lot of people now are kind of just going, you know what, like typically I would sell this, get into my next home, put all the equity in. But in a lot of cases now they can just buy the next one and then rent it out. Maybe they have to go with a B lender to make it work to qualify. But we're seeing a lot of people that just don't want to, either they're just going to stay put and put off the next purchase, or they're going to just rent out the old home, get the new one if they've already committed, and then just rent it for a year to see if the market bounces back. So yeah, a lot of the first time unintentional landlords for sure on that end that we're seeing it too.
Yeah, good point, Alex, for sure. Like for, as Hart said, we released our rent report recently, and 2 months straight of rent stabilization in some major markets, notwithstanding, the Torontos, Vancouvers, and maybe the Guelph type areas. Yeah, it's very indicative of the market right now. And I would say like the conversation around, where's that peak or where's that leveling out from a tenant perspective. So Hart, just sticking, oh, sorry, Hamza, did you want to jump in?
No, I just wanted to add to that, all great points. And again, it's a conversation to be had with the client and the investor, right? Their profile, whether they're a long-term hold, short-term hold, whether they're just, it's a very a personal decision. Again, I can relate to that. I have a few rental properties, and again, depending on your investor profile, if you're in it for the long term, perhaps it's okay for you to weather the storm and take the hit for if you can withstand it, take the hit for 6 months, a year. And yeah, the hope is this will pass, and we can weather the storm, right? Because as as Hart mentioned, we're always on the go for our next property. It's it's nice to keep building our portfolio. So to let go of a property, it's a tough one. It's a really tough one. And as investors and as landlords, we don't want to do that. Generally speaking, it's a tough decision. So it also depends on the profile. Is what I'm getting at. Depending on what your intentions were when you're getting into the property, long-term, short-term, and just the general environmental factors. Just listening to the news, with the immigration and the numbers that are coming into the country. So there's still that strong push for that need for housing. So many factors to consider, especially cash flow, but also that demand that we are hoping and will come to push our real estate back up.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Hamza. That's good insight. Just a question that's come in just before we move on to the next subject from Rob is, in this market, what's considered a strong cap rate? And follow-up, sorry, can we depend on the government actually hitting those numbers to maintain current rental demand? So I'll pitch it to the panel, and whomever wants to answer that or attempt to answer, I guess they're two different questions overall.
Yeah, I'll jump in first, and maybe it's more of a question for Hamza in terms of what he's seeing his clientele at, or Alex. But on our end, when we evaluate cap rates, we're looking at huge variations in cap rate. When you look at Thunder Bay versus Toronto, when you look at markets that have, or you're looking at apartment buildings or small multifamily as an asset class versus single family homes, with Bill 23 being passed, some of these multi-home properties are going to be looked at very differently. So I wouldn't say that there's a strong cap rate unless you're talking about a specific market, but definitely find a real estate investment specific realtor who can help you out within those specific markets, who understands the intended cap rate that you're looking for and what a good one is for that market.
Yeah, and maybe just to chime in on that as well, it's historically, I agree with Hart. It's really just depends on the market, where you're typically going to go for yield and capital gains, or a combination of both. And I think what we're seeing a lot with a lot of investor clients is being able to pick up market or properties in this market that are going below market value in a lot of cases. So when you're looking at effective ROE in general, it's going to be a combination of yield and capital gains. And we're seeing a lot of people pricing in higher than expected increases in property appreciation in the next year or two, cumulatively. So it's really something that kind of factors in, where you can get high rents if you're getting a new property, and then the expected bounce back of property values for some that have dipped maybe a little too low compared to where they should be. So I think, so cap rate is one thing, but I think overall it's like taking a focus on what's the ROE, or the expected return overall of the property, is really important.
Well, I agree with Alex. It's such a hard one to answer because so many factors, like Hart mentioned, the geography of where you are, when you purchased it, when you locked in your rental with the tenant, right? And especially considering such strong variations in housing prices, interest, and rent, it's hard to kind of narrow down what is standard anymore, at least in the last year or two. When things are consistent, it's easier to say, hey, you know what, you should be hitting 5% or 10%, because it's such a peaks and valleys in so many ways. It's hard to identify a particular point. But generally speaking, if you're in a positive cap rate, 2, 3, 4, 5%, I mean, you're doing well. And as Alex mentioned, really it's the capital gains, the appreciation that was most beneficial to all, right, in the long term. So cap rate it's a tough one to answer, really, but the appreciation is really what landlords are going for. At least I know personally. Again, I'm a long-term hold. I always look at, okay, in 10 years, 20 years, this property is going to definitely pay off, right, in terms of the appreciation factor. No one's necessarily looking at or new landlords or early in our portfolio. We're not looking to get rich. We're not going to be cash flow positive, so to speak, right? Things continue to come at us, if you will, and then whether it's major repairs or you have a bad tenant, and so things like that kind of take away from the cap rate or perhaps your cash flow positives. But the long term should always have a positive return on investment for sure.
Yeah.
Which is there. Yeah.
And just to add to that, I mean, the early on in Rent Panda's founding, we were dealing primarily with landlords in Thunder Bay. I'm sure a lot of people on this call are from Thunder Bay, and cap rates of 2 and 3% were not looked upon very highly in a market like Thunder Bay. But in Toronto, investors were very happy with that. They were happy with, like Hamza said, anything that's positive cash flow, positive cap rate. And in Thunder Bay, because of the historical appreciation being much, much lower than in the Golden Horseshoe, we were going to look at cash flowing properties, looking at how to add value to those properties, especially as zoning changed and now Bill 23 is coming into play. So I think in this market, not necessarily focusing on cap rate, but focusing on the ability to add value to a property in other ways, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is going to really be key in order to not only maximize cash flow, but also optimize that property over its historical lifetime, whether you're looking at a 5, 10, 20-year investment. Really, looking outside of the box and adding value to that property as part of your portfolio is going to be key. And then just in terms of, can we depend on the government actually hitting those numbers? Maybe just to clarify, are you talking about the immigration numbers, Rob, or
immigration, housing? Which numbers?
You can just pop on if you want to. Well, I mean, if it is immigration, I think if we look at the historical numbers, yes, there's a big statement about 500,000 new immigrants coming into the country. But it's not that dramatic of an increase from the 430,000 that came in this year, or I think it was the 419,000 the year before. So it is an increase, but it's not an exponential increase. And I think it is realistic. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I think looking at those trends and looking at different renter profiles that a typical landlord would be open to and think about as an ideal tenant is really key, considering the new immigrant population that's coming in, considering the opportunities with student rentals and new, international students coming into play. So that there is a lot of opportunity there, but I don't think it's wild to expect, 500,000 new immigrants coming into the country next year.
Great, thanks, Hart. Just to transition, because we have a couple more subjects that we want to get through. Rob, if that didn't answer your question, definitely throw it in chat and we'll address it as the conversation goes along. But we want to transition to growth of rental portfolio. So Alex, just to pitch it to you for a moment, continuing the conversation of, rental portfolio, what do you think the biggest barriers are that Perch sees for people trying to get, from 1 to 2 rentals or that first time buyer to 3+, in terms of a mortgage? What do you think are you seeing on your end?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes through these stages of evolution almost in your mortgage mindset. So when everybody starts, like the goal is I'm going to get all of my rental properties with a prime lender or an A lender, which is honestly really hard to do. Like to actually grow like a huge scalable portfolio on the A side, unless you have just a massive amount of qualifying income. It's intentionally structured to make it hard for you to cap a lot of properties, but for two reasons. So typically lenders will only take 50% of your rental income when qualifying it for the mortgage. So if you just look at it as like on that net basis, the chances that your mortgage, property taxes, and heating will be more than 50% of your rents is almost guaranteed. So every property that you accrue is going to be like a qualifying income reduction. Combine that with higher qualifying rates. And on top of that, a lot of lenders have what's called a door limit where they won't go beyond maybe 5 or 10 properties, whatever it might be. So everybody eventually hits a wall when it comes to A lending, because that's where most people will start off. But then eventually, once you kind of open your eyes to a lot of the other options, so whether it's a combination of what I call a hybrid product, so it can be an A with a private or a B with a private, or just going to a B lending institution or alternative lenders, as a lot of them might be called. B lenders will typically take 70 to 80% or even 85% of market rents in some cases, compared to 50%. Combine that with higher approval limits, higher qualifying ratios, and things like that, and you can dramatically increase your qualifying portfolio. So the first time that usually comes up in conversations will be if somebody wants to sell their home to buy a new one and they have the equity. They don't necessarily need to sell. So then the natural question is, well, do you want to just convert this into a rental? Like, do you need to sell this property? And a lot of people didn't even know that they could really qualify for both. So I think it's really just asking those questions, because if you are in that situation, there might be more options than you realize. So the first one is kind of being open to more financing options and looking at the bigger picture. So if you end up paying an extra %, 1.5% on your interest rate, but you're able to get a really good opportunity on a price point, like, is it worth it? Because on $1 million, an extra % is $10,000 a year, right? But if you can get 50 to 100 grand, let's say, in price appreciation or something like that, then that's something that's definitely worth considering. The other thing is there's a benefit of like the DIY, because that's what I love about the small scale landlord, or the entrepreneurial spirit of wanting to kind of navigate the seas. But then there is a limit to how far you can really kind of DIY this. So asking for the right advice up front. So I'm sure Hamza can tell you a ton of stories of people that want to incorporate way down the stage, and it's something they should have asked 5 years ago, and it's a huge headache to move everything over. Once you decide that would have actually been a better structure, or even people working, let's say, as they're trying to screen tenants and put together all these systems to organize and scale their portfolio, and it's limiting them. So a lot of the things that we see that are common mistakes is legal units versus non-legal units, and how much of the rent you can actually use to qualify. For self-employed individuals, there's a huge tax planning element where you're able to really kind of batch a lot of your mortgages in one go to avoid paying unnecessary amounts of tax to keep qualifying. And last but not least is net worth programs. So a lot of lenders will help you qualify for more based on liquid assets. Unfortunately, the equity you have in your home doesn't count as a liquid asset, but you can withdraw the equity in your home into a liquid asset and then use it to qualify. So there are ways where you can really kind of take the aggregate of your portfolio, shuffle things around, take that snapshot, take it to the bank, leverage up on the A side, and then kind of, rinse and repeat down the road. So really taking that approach and batching whenever you can to minimize tax as a self-employed individual particularly is something that's definitely worth looking at. And also the bringing on of guarantors. So we've had a couple cases where you can put a sibling on, a parent on, whatever it might be, as a guarantor, and it doesn't necessarily affect them because it's not going to show up on their credit report and they're not on title. So there's no tax implications necessarily. So just some of the things that you can look at to expand your qualifying income to help grow your portfolio past, maybe if you hit that wall at 2 or 3 properties is where people typically hit their max.
Great. That was a very in-depth answer. Thanks, Alex. That was awesome.
No worries.
Hamza, in terms of from the tax side, do you mind, I know Alex touched on it a little bit, do you mind just expanding, in terms of growth of a rental portfolio and some things that, everyone should consider?
Most definitely. I mean, you want to be mindful of making sure your income is presented in the fashion that lenders are wanting to look at it. Whether it's A lenders or B lenders, everybody has their particular focus points. Okay, generally the A lenders want to see something that's consistent, traditional T4s. Want to make sure you structure your remuneration from your business accordingly, right? Obviously, you need to have the cash flows there. You need to show that strength, as Alex mentioned, that income, that so you can have a strong application for that A lender. And again, depending on where you are in your stage of portfolio building, if you're the third, fourth, fifth property and you are entertaining B lenders, again, then we need to make sure you present your personal finances accordingly, right? And this could again mean whether it's paying you a salary or a dividend. Perhaps you don't need the cash, right? So we don't need to pay you anything personally. The B lender is only going to look at your business, right? So we don't need to artificially increase your income just to satisfy the lender, because they're not going to care necessarily about what you're making personally. Because if your business is strong in its earnings, that's what's put forth, and that's what's backs up the application. So depending on where you are in the stage of your portfolio building, and who you're going to target for financing, we want to present you accordingly. And again, this is planning that gets done in advance, because sometimes lenders average 2 years, right? And you don't want to be in a situation where I've seen this is, I'm going in for financing. Can we just, do it this 1 year and then I don't have to do it again or something, lenders are a bit wise to that, if you will. Again, some want to see consistency. Again, depending on where you're going, you want to plan ahead. And this is where we have our discussions with our clients about their short-term goals, long-term goals, cash flow needs, investment needs, and so on and so forth, so that, I don't want to know about somebody wanting to buy a property, in the 6 months or 3 months. Like generally that should be on the radar for like a year plus in advance, so to speak. So we can, again, start thinking about how much to pay you, when to pay you, who you're going to be going after for financing. So this all comes into tax planning, when we do our year-end meetings with all of our clients, just to get an update. Hey, what's changed in the last year, right? What's on a go-forward basis for you, your family, so on, so that we can incorporate that into your taxes.
And actually, just very quickly on that, one big use case that we've seen a lot come up for this is pre-construction. So when you bought 2-3 years ago and you qualified at 5.25, you might not qualify anymore at 7.5 or 8%. So making sure that you're so like we always tell our clients, like we're going to meet in November or December and start talking about like what is your dividend going to be, your income, like your salary, whatever it is that you're going to pay yourself out. So it's always good to just plan that ahead, because since it is a 2-year average, if you make a mistake in 1 year and it's like a bad one, then you might have to wait 2 more years basically for your 2-year average to pick back up. So it can be an expensive mistake to make.
Yeah. And also, just if it's your very, very first property, and again, if the circumstances allow, and piggybacking, leveraging, maybe you want to buy your first property yourself, take advantage of some of the first-time home buyers credits and withdrawals and whatnot, settle yourself, and try to piggyback off that to buy your next property, the rental property that is, right? So again, depending on the situation, it might make sense to actually buy your personal property first, take advantage of all this stuff, because you don't want to also taint yourself, because even though you might be buying a rental property as your first property, and when you go to buy your own property, your principal residence, you may not qualify for a lot of these the benefits and the tax credits and whatnot, because you had a rental property. So sometimes it makes sense to buy a property yourself, just to take advantage of it. Of course, build your own equity and whatnot, and then you can leverage off that one in maybe 6 months, a year, to buy your rental, right?
Great, both builds, Hamza and Alex. That's awesome. Appreciate that. And then Hart, just from the the rental side in terms of growing the portfolio, what are some barriers and obviously some learnings that Rent Panda can provide?
Yeah, for sure. I think Alex mentioned it very briefly, and we could probably unpack it for an hour and a half just on its own, if not more. But it's really about the development of systems. And so a lot of first-time landlords will kind of just muscle their way through things. When you pick up your second property, you can do the same. But when you get into 3, 4, 5 double-digit properties, you're really going to feel all of those pain points that exist in finding tenants, messaging them, screening them, building your leases, sending your N1s on a yearly basis and a timely basis, all of those micro moments that are slightly painful start to become exponentially more painful. And so first and foremost is building systems. If you are going to be that DIYer, make sure that you have absolutely bulletproof systems, that you're using all of the digital tools out there to streamline your posting and your advertising, your communication, your booking of showings, your lease building, your screening systems, because it's very easy to get lazy with placing a tenant, and that tenant could cost you tens of thousands of dollars with the LTV the way that it is. We won't go into that. That's a whole nother webinar and a half. But having those systems in place is really important. And as you start to scale, or even if it's your first time doing it, getting the experts involved right away is key. And so if you don't know what you're doing and you haven't bought a property yet, get a coach, get a mentor, get the proper, mortgage broker and tax accountant and leasing specialist and everyone on board who can really help you navigate. And don't think of it as, just copying out and having someone else do it for you, because these people are going to educate you along the way. And maybe in your second and third property, you can step back and do more of it yourself. And even though you're handing over the reins at the start, and as you scale, you're going to need to build those teams. So you're going to have your own systems, and then you're going to build your teams. And that's, your typical real estate investment power team of your real estate agent, your mortgage broker, your insurance broker, your tax specialist, your accountant, your lawyers, all of those people. And then, potentially your leasing specialists, your property managers, and maybe if you're buying multifamily or larger buildings, your supers. And so building out your team is absolutely critical to surviving that scale up and not drowning under a sea of process and systems. Because most people, at that level are still part-time real estate investors, part-time landlords. We've got 9 to 5s. We're not doing this day in, day out. And dealing with it in your 6 to 9 as opposed to your 9 to 5 or on the weekends is really going to start to suck into time that you want to be spending with friends and family and enjoying life, even though everyone here is probably ambitious and looking to scale. So those are some really key things that you want to think through. And a lot can be dug into in terms of building those systems and processes. But ultimately, if you don't have systems for every step of the rental journey, talk to all the experts and start building out those systems right away.
If I may just add to that, I can't stress that enough about having the right team around you. I can tell you so many stories about people coming to me after the fact, and it's like, I really mean this. It's like, I wish you had consulted not even me, any other tax accountant, somebody, because they would have guided you in the right direction, right? And I can tell you that from many different angles, contexts, where someone does not do it and then they end up paying the price later. So it's really, really, really important that you consult the right professionals. You really do get what you pay for, if you will. And if you think you're saving $500 by not consulting somebody, that can cost you dearly down the road, really dearly. And again, when you talk to any one of us here, we come with many, many, many years of experience with hundreds of clients that we've dealt with, if not thousands, and the list goes on. So, for us to advise a client on something and, again, listening to their unique situation, in our mind, a million things are happening when we advise, right? But it's in your best interest. So it's very, very important that you consult the right professional. It truly is. And again, I always tell everybody that I meet, whether it's the first time or we're having to make a referral, find the right professional. It just pays off for sure.
Hamza, to that point, we often get asked the question, and there seems to be a varying swath of answers. But as people start to scale their portfolios up to 3 or 4 units, they're often doing it as part of a JV partnership. So is there kind of a common pitfall to avoid if there's anyone on here who's looking to maybe jump into that third property and is looking at a JV, and is looking to start that system up, kind of the number 1 or 2 pitfalls to avoid?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind anytime it's you plus somebody is having an agreement in place. With all the respect, I don't care if it's your brother, sister, mother. You got to have an agreement in place. And this is again a professional talking from having seen it. Everything's rosy until it's not, right? So I think the first thing you need to do is get yourself a lawyer. and it's in the best interest of yourself and the other parties to have an agreement, because you need to have an exit clause. What's the clause for having additional people join, buying somebody out? The list goes on. This is again where I would say, hey, talk to a lawyer, please. You need to have an agreement. Okay, so that's number one. And number two, of course, is having the right tax professional involved so that it optimizes everyone's situation. And again, it might be, now JVs are unique in that JVs are not recognized for tax purposes. So we have to be careful how the parties involved are structured, right? Because you could have many members, and maybe one member says, you know what, I'm a passive investor. I don't care for the cash flow. I just want a long-term hold here, right? Versus investor two said, no. I want to get paid out. I don't mind putting some time into it, but I also want to get paid something for my time. So there's a whole background to this, again, that we can get into. So again, this is where someone like myself would come in and say, okay, you know what, let's focus, on who's involved, what their intentions are, how are we going to deal with, everybody's needs, whether it's from a tax point of view or cash flow, or what their intentions are. The list goes on. So again, it's agreement and having a right tax advisor to make sure everyone's satisfied and it's structured in a proper manner.
Cool.
Great. Thanks, Hamza. That's great.
No
just to transition to, I see a comment in here. So probably Alex, this is more geared towards you. But what are you expecting with mortgage rates in the near future? Sean's looking to renew within the next year.
So I guess our outlook right now is essentially that fixed rates have already started to come back down. So we almost got under 3% 5-year bond yields earlier this week. It was like, there's not a lot of us cheering on that like as a spectator sport, but yeah, looking at that bond yield curve is something that's on a daily basis. So it's looking, so on the fixed rate side, our view is that it's already kind of plateaued. So rates are starting to come back down. We've already seen 5-year fixed rates, even today, actually, not as relevant on the rental side, but the high ratio rates dipped to below 4.8. So we're back almost to the mid 4.5s on the insured side. So fixed rates should continue to trend downward. We're expecting the Bank of Canada to do a 1/4 point increase on Wednesday. There's nobody really knows if it's going to be 0.5 point or a 1/4 point. We think it'll be a 1/4. There's going to be a couple more increases leading into early 2023. And after that, it's going to be a steady decline for, so we're actually going to put out an interest rate forecast, I think, later this week. So I won't spoil it too much, but basically we're going to go down by about 1% per year for the next 2 years when it comes to variable rates.
Hopefully that answered your question, Sean. Pretty detailed, but yeah, it's kind of a half a guess, half educational side of things. So okay, just because I know we only have about less than 15 minutes with everyone here. Kevin's question. So who are these experts you're referring to? You mentioned tax accountants. What are experts are critical to have around you? I think we probably built or spoke about all of those experts, or as Hart was saying, the power team, but I'll leave it up to the panel here if there's anything you can add to answer the question from Kevin.
You'll have the accountant, your mortgage advisor, whether it's bank advisor or mortgage broker. Lawyer. You'll have your real estate agent, your therapist, but that's really kind of the core. And then you'll have like your tools and your systems, but those aren't really. It'll be more software or licenses rather than people.
Yeah, and I think on the rental side, I mean, it's important to think about your rental journey. And so if you think about buying a property and then filling it with tenants and then managing those tenants and then having those tenants leave and then selling the property at the end of the day, what are all of the professionals that are going to help you along the way? So, starting with potentially a real estate investment coach or, networking group, then going into your real estate agents, your mortgage brokers, your insurance brokers, your tax specialists, your accountants, your lawyers, and on the rental side, your leasing specialists, potentially your property managers, if you scale to the point where you need property management, and then going down into the minutia. So if you are doing it yourself, in terms of management, you need your cleaners, you need your handyman, you need your plumbers, you need your carpenters, you need your roofers, you need your person on call for when you're on vacation. So really think through all of the steps that you need to take as a landlord, and then who is the best person or what is the best digital tool that's available out there that can help you through that step in the journey.
Yeah, and just remember, experts could be, as you just mentioned, it could be anybody. I mean, again, not to downplay or anything, but yeah, cleaners or anything that you are doing yourself right now. If you can get it done, get that individual or company or service to help you, assist you, right? It could be anything. So it's a very broad term, and it could apply to many different areas. Anything that you think you're doing anything you're doing right now for the rental property, there is a service out there that can provide that for you. And again, depending on where you are in your stage and how complex it is, again, you don't want to play lawyer, you don't want to play tax accountant. So certain things you just kind of hand off. Other things you may be doing right now, and again, with time, it just may be easier to pass it on to another professional to let them handle it. Certain things you just want to have the professionals do.
Yeah, great point, Hamza, for sure. All right, great. So just in terms of, I think we'll transition to our final topic. We have about 10 minutes left. So Hamza, I'll kick it back to you. We'll switch up the order a little bit. And just in terms of what you think the market holds for 2023, just some insight from your end, and then we'll go to Alex and then finish up with Hart.
I believe the market's going to hold strong. We've lived through a few tumultuous times, where the market dips, but ultimately it does bounce back. And it's I always tell all my fellow landlords or like-minded individuals, the immigration factor, right? That kind of is holding up Canada's real estate market, if you will, at least a big chunk of it, the playing factor here. So given our strong immigration numbers, people need a place to live. So the market will remain strong. It does see dips. It has gone through dips, but also being a long-term minded investor, landlord, individual, that's my perception, right? Versus if I'm going to be a short-term flipper or just doing assignment deals or something, then it's a harder market to predict, and it's like buying stocks almost, right? Like when you want to buy high, sell low, which is tough to do with real estate because it's not stocks, right? But you're almost treating it like so. I believe the market's going to hold strong, and as the rates as we get used to the rates, we get used to the economy, we'll adjust and we'll come up with new strategies and new methodologies to overcome these and ultimately still achieve our goals, because there's always a solution at the end of the day. There's always a solution. Again, you have to go to the right individuals who can talk to you, understand their unique situations, and provide solutions. That's our goal, is to provide solutions to all our clients.
Yeah, that's great, Hamza. I think probably the underlying conversation is really around expertise and the call and building out that team, but it all ladders up back to you're really engaging experts across the board.
Oh, definitely, 100%. And we can tell you many stories where someone doesn't do it, and it's like I wish you did, but we try to make the best of it. And then there's the odd good stories too, where people get in touch with you right from day one, and it's you give them A for the initiative, and those are the individuals I see really saving from day one, if you will, right, from a tax point of view, structuring their investments or companies, whatever it may be, right from the get-go. We get them started on the right foot.
Great, thanks, Hamza. Alex, just not to pressure you on time, but just for yourself and Hart, about 7 minutes left.
Yeah, and I'll give it quick. So outlook for next year then. So our view is that we've hit the more or less the bottom of like how far housing is going to fall, or at least in the GTA area is really like the core, and probably for most parts of Canada as well, with a few exceptions. So what we're thinking is likely going to happen is we're already in or are going to keep entering recession in terms of like slower or negative GDP growth for Q1 of 2023. we think that is going to really kind of prompt, because the Bank of Canada is essentially at the point where they're trying to kill inflation. But the thing with monetary policy is it takes a while to go through. So just because they hiked rates last month doesn't mean we're going to see inflation slow down this month. So by the time all of those rate hikes catch up with us, it's going to be felt incredibly by a lot of parts of the economy. So in Q1, as we enter what we think will be a recession, it'll then put the brakes on a lot of this, and we'll see a reversal into in Q2 of what will likely be stimulative monetary policy and potentially fiscal policy. That is going to push a ton of momentum into the housing market. And we think that is where, so we think by the end of Q2 is when it'll start to take back off from a price appreciation standpoint.
Great. Thanks, Alex. And Hart.
Yeah, for sure. I'll mimic Alex just on the rental side in terms of a delayed fuse. And so definitely, the stabilization of rents that we've seen the last couple of months should trickle into Q1 of next year. We should see markets still coming down, which isn't necessarily great for us as investors, but it does mean more predictability in terms of the rents in markets. This lack of exponential growth, so that when you're buying a property, you can properly predict what it's going to bring in from a rent perspective and run your numbers a little bit more logically. But again, as Alex said, as we enter into Q2 of next year, we should see those rents start to come back up. It won't be the exponential increases of COVID days, but it will be a stable increase in rents again. So we can predict that. But definitely the next couple of months are going to be tight. There is an increase in rental inventory with all of these new landlords coming on board, these flippers, these wholesalers dropping their properties on the rental market. So there's a glut in the market in terms of the number of tenants out there. So you want to be aggressive in your marketing of your property. You want to be unique in your offering. You maybe want to drop your rents a little bit to be just under where everyone else is and not push market rents to really get the highest quality tenant in there. Because a really great long-term tenant or midterm tenant, I should say, that 2 to 3 year perfect tenant is ideal for your ROI on a property. But in the meantime, think about cash optimizations and optimizing your processes overall. Think about how you can bring down your expenses, whether it's self-managing or thinking about a different tenant profile, like students or these new immigrants who are coming in who may be able to pay a little bit more for a property, or not doing those super high class renovations of your unit. You can still renovate a unit to be a really solid rental and a really solid home, but you don't need to put in those quartz countertops. You don't need to put in all of those high-end finishes. You can just provide stable housing for that new immigrant population coming through. So just thinking a little bit differently about your investments and making sure that they work in the long term and that across your portfolio, they allow you to weather the storm of the next 4 to 6 months, depending.
Thanks, Art. Yeah, it sounds like based on what you're saying and Alex saying, in terms of a little predictability is always good. Maybe a little short-term pain for long-term gain, but at least if you're budgeting, it sounds like there's you can be a little more predictable in terms of what you're looking at from a mortgage and then from a rental rate as well. So that's always good for everybody to have a plan. So yeah, we're right at the end of the meeting right now, or the webinar. Just want to throw it out to anybody who has any questions for any of the panelists. We'll leave it open. Just to note, I've left all the contact details for Hamza, Alex, and Hart in the chat. And what we'll do is we'll send a follow-up email to everyone just to make sure if you need to contact them and you didn't quite get it in the chat, that you have the information available. So just if you have any comments or questions for the group, we'll give it 30 seconds and wait to see if anything comes in. Or feel free to jump on video and chat, whatever you prefer. Fair enough.
As we wait for some questions, I will say one thing to bring up is, thinking about adding value to your current portfolio or potentially looking at new deals. We'll probably do a whole nother webinar on Bill 23, but that is something to look at. Think about adding auxiliary units to your current properties, thinking about adding, coin operated laundry to your properties, thinking about all the things, both, high value and small cash flow wise, that you can add to your current portfolio is going to help optimize that cash flow in the short term and may help you, springboard into that newer property. And, we mentioned JV partners, or I brought it up on my own, but it's definitely something to look at. There's a lot of opportunity out there right now. You just need to be scrutinizing deals, through and through, but bringing on JV partners who may have done it before, who may provide access to capital that can allow you to capitalize on some of these deals, but also weather the storm, are good tactics to start to think about as the new year approaches.
Great. With that, we're at the time, everyone. So I just want to thank all the landlords and participants for jumping on the call. I know it's not easy, Monday at 7 o'clock, the start of the week, but everyone, I'll speak for everyone on the panel and saying, we really appreciate you participating and joining the call, and we hope to continue doing these webinars in the future. And like I said before, if you have, if you would like to contact anyone on the panel, their contact information is in the chat, and we'll send a follow-up note for everyone. But thank you for coming, and thank you for participating.
Awesome.
Have a
Thanks
great night,
for
everyone.
moderating, Rob. Appreciate your time, and have a good night, everybody.
No problem.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great night, everyone.